Good evening, social media. Let's get the music started and let everybody in the room. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Veterans Breakfast Club, Greatest Generation Live for Thursday, November 7th. My name is Sean Hall. I'm the Director of Programming with the VBC. And for those of you who are joining new to us, we are a nonprofit here in Western PA, and our mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. We've been doing our Greatest Generation Live program for basically the entirety of this year, and with our wonderful host with the most, Glenn Flickinger. Glenn, how are you?
I don't know. You're setting up some very high expectations there, host with the most. I'm nervous now. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Greatest Generation Live for Thursday night. Thank you, Sean, for the kind introduction. Uh, yeah, this year, since the beginning of the year, as most of you know, we've been focusing pretty much on the air war over Europe. We did nothing but that for the first 5 or 6 months. We went to England with a group of 30 VBC members and had a great time seeing the air bases and seeing the other World War II sites. We have since then varied it a little bit and actually talked about some other aspects of World War II. I think the last show that we did last week, we got preempted by Halloween. We've learned in Pittsburgh, never go up against Halloween or the Steelers. You will lose. Feel like the Cowboys there, Jim. Won't never, anyway. The week before that, we had the 80th anniversary of the Battle off Samar, which is part of the Battle of Leyte Gulf. So that was a variation from the air over Europe. Tonight, we're back to the fixation I have here with Harry Crosby's book, A Wing and a Prayer. This is the third episode we've done on this, and we got one more planned. And we're very fortunate tonight to have a lot of people who know a lot more than I do about Harry Crosby and how to navigate a B-17 and Harry Crosby's experience in navigating a B-17. So let me go through our guests. Nancy Putman from the 100th Bomb Group Association. Nancy, please say hello.
Hello.
Very good. Nancy's become one of our loyal followers on all of this for the past 6 months and has introduced us to a lot of people in the 100 Bomb Group, helped us even with our English trip. So thank you. Next, we have Rebecca Hutchinson. Rebecca, good to see you. And Rebecca is the daughter of Harry Crosby. So she's supplied some invaluable content for us. Last time we were on with the discussion about prayer was on the Bremen mission of October 8th, 1943. And it was really quite powerful when Rebecca was able to read some sections out of letters that Harry sent home to his wife and his mother just after the mission, thoughts that were fresh on his mind. That was a particularly, I think, powerful part of the discussion. So thank you, Rebecca. We also have from the 100th Bomb Group Foundation, Jim Blakely. Jim.
Hey. Hello.
Nice to see you again. Jim's been on with us a few times before. Did an excellent PowerPoint presentation for us earlier this year, that 13 beds. Jim is the son of Ev Blakely, who features very highly, very much in the Masters of the Air episodes, but features in this in Harry's book as well. And you'll hear about him tonight. And then we have our navigator of the night, Bob Von Bargen. Bob, say hello, please.
Hello.
Okay. Bob is not with the 100th Bomb Group Foundation. Bob is a loyal member of the VBC out of New Jersey, Bob was a navigator for 20 years in the Air Force. Bob, give everybody a little bit of background as to what your navigation experience was.
Well, I went to nav school in '59, went to Strategic Air Command, KC-97s, then to Pittsburgh, 119s and 124s, and then ended up at McGuire in 141s. A little over 5,000 flying hours.
Yep. That's and Bob has been an invaluable resource for me and helped me understand just a little bit about navigation. And he's going to be our go-to guy tonight when we have our navigation questions. And then we might have Mike Faley on. I don't see him on. Mike is the historian for the 100th Bomb Group Foundation, but he is very much under the weather this week with that terrible virus and flu that's been going around. So I don't think he's going to be on. We'll catch him if he does, obviously. I see a few other friends. I see Colin. How you doing, Colin Heaton? Let me ask you to unmute.
Hey, all.
Good to see you, Colin. We've got a favorite story tonight for you. One of your favorite characters, I should say, and that's Curtis LeMay.
Yeah, yeah.
Has to be a part of every one of these 8th Air Force stories. I don't know how you could not have a program without talking about him.
Yeah, the father of navigation.
Yeah. So when we get to that, I'm sure you'll have a comment or two. Let's see, is Ed Cottrell with us tonight? I'm just glancing through this. I don't see Ed.
I do not see Ed Cottrell.
Okay. If he comes on, we'll recognize him. I think most of you know Ed from our previous program, our favorite World War II P-47 pilot who accompanied us to England. Okay, so let's get started on this. Let me tee up the I should tell you too. The other guest we have tonight is John Luckadoo. John was not available to be on live tonight. He's in Washington, D.C. at some veterans event. I can't remember what, but he graciously allowed us to talk to him this past Monday. Todd and I did, and I went through, as you'll see in what I'm going to play back, a lot of questions about what it was like to navigate. You know, he was a co-pilot and pilot, but he knew how to navigate as well, part of his training. And so, you know, it's interesting to get it from the actual somebody who was actually there, right? So the sources tonight are our experts, Luckadoo, and of course, Harry's incomparable book. Okay. So let me get started with this PowerPoint. I'll tee it up. And then here and there, we're going to be cutting in about 11 or 12 minutes of comments from Lucky. There we go. Okay, are we good now?
Yep.
Okay. Navigating a B-17. I'll skip through these first slides real quick because I've already talked about them. There's Harry's book published in 1994, I think it was, in the 90s. And it really serves as much as a basis for the Masters of the Air episodes as does Don Miller's Masters of the Air book. The content is just incredible, and Harry was a fantastic writer, right? And of course, here he is again, shown on screen. Harry, of course, on the left, and the actor's name again on the right there, Nancy.
Anthony Boyle.
Anthony Boyle, who, as Lucky said, didn't look anything like Harry, but he sure acted like him. He sure portrayed him well. So congratulations to Anthony Boyle for that, for portraying him so well. And then here, of course, is John Luckadoo, a very youthful-looking John Luckadoo, who we've had on many times. I'm not going to go into John's background, but he was part of the original cadre, I guess we would say, Nancy, of the 100th Bomb Group. I think you know his story. We had his first time we met him was 2-3 years ago when his book came out, and that is so well done. Highly recommend his book. And the stories are just many, and fascinating, besides, the little bit we're going to touch on tonight. Okay. So I thought I would start with a 2.5 minute clip of Lucky. The question that I asked him here was this: what is it like? Give us a couple of minutes of your thoughts on the taking off and formation of the group, and then of the squad, the group, and then perhaps the wing, in that terrible weather that they had in England in 1943 when they first got there. So here's Lucky's remarks. John, do I have to take mine down, or are you going to do that for me?
You're muted.
Hold on one sec. I'll take yours down.
Okay.
And let me share my video. Okay. Okay, can everybody see this?
Nope.
Nope.
No. Yep, there it is. There he is.
There it is. Okay, took a second. Computer's running slow. Here we go.
Well, actually, the terror of taking off into the weather that we had to encounter in England, the fog, the rain, and the cold, all combined to give us the bejeebies. As far as the relationship between the pilot and the navigator is concerned, the heavy responsibility, of course, naturally fell on the shoulders of the lead navigator of the formation.
Right.
He was the guy that was really having to shoulder the responsibility of getting the entire formation not only assembled initially over England before we started out on our mission, but also to make the necessary points on time and to keep the formation flying specifically according to the way the mission was structured to get to the target. Oftentimes we would be directed to make a feint in one direction as if we were going to one target, and then we would make a turn. The formation was supposed to make a turn and go to a different target, and that was our ultimate objective. I don't know that there's really been the proper amount of credit attributed to the tremendous responsibility that lead navigator had, and also how that reverberated through the rest of the formation, because each crew, of course, carried a navigator as well as a bombardier, and the navigators, other than the lead navigator, were primarily there just to follow along
Right.
what the lead navigator was doing in conjunction with his pilot.
Is that where we stopped it? Good.
Yep. Yeah, 440. Go ahead.
Okay. So let me put this back up. So what I was trying to get from Lucky there is that sense of that was portrayed so well in the Master of the Air episodes, of them taking off in such low visibility. Sometimes they could hardly see the end of the tip of the wing on their sides. Yet they'd take off, maybe get a few hundred feet of clear weather, then hit the clouds and be in the clouds for 10, 12, 15,000 feet. And how difficult that was, and how dependent, as he mentioned, they were on the navigator, getting them through that as they formed up. And the next shot I want to show you here was something I can't remember who sent this to me. Oh, that's not it. There we go. I'll come back to that. So this is a overhead picture of all the heavy bomber bases in East Anglia, right? You can see the outline of the coast. There's the Wash, Cambridge sort of right in the middle. So these are all the bomber bases. And you see right here where I'm circling the indicator was the 100th Bomb Group's base. And you see when they took off, what they would do. They had this area here that they would circle more or less until all of the group, all three squadrons, 20 planes or so, depending on the mission, could form up around them. At the same time that that's happening, now, not all of these bomb groups were on every mission. This would have been every single one, but there'd be, 6 or 7 other bomb groups or more forming up over East Anglia. And this is not a huge area. I don't have the miles here in mind, but it's I know you can drive from Cambridge to Thorpe Abbott's in what, an hour or so,
Yep.
Nancy? About an hour. So it's
the 95th, 390th, and 100th were each about 5 miles apart. 5-6 miles.
Yeah. And there were just lots and lots of accidents as these planes took off, particularly in the heavy weather, because they couldn't see each other. And they had minimal radar or visual skills. They had this Splasher 6. Nancy, you want to explain Splasher 6? It was a radio beacon that they could hone in on and use that as the circle.
Yeah. It was they basically, each group had a beacon that they circled around and in formation as they went up, literally slowly like this. My dad said it was the worst part of a mission. And then in reverse coming home, they honed in on it, their beacon, to get back home. So it was like their radio signal in essence.
Yeah. And then the other really kind of fascinating thing, and I want to bring Bob into this because he supplied this picture. Some of the bomb groups had this kind of funny looking circus vehicle. Bob, you want to explain where you found that or what the story is behind it?
That picture was found. I was interviewing Lieutenant Colonel Hansen, who was a B-24 lead pilot, and Chief Master Sergeant Larry Lowndes was doing the interviewing, and he found this picture, and we showed it to Colonel Hansen. And when we flashed it up on the screen, his eyes lit up, and he went, "The Wonder Bread!" And those dots there, you can't tell, they're blue and red, and it looked like the Wonder Bread wrapper. And this airplane typically was pretty one of the ones that was shot up, that it was still flyable, but it was no longer mission capable. So it would take off about 15 minutes ahead of the formation, and then lead would join up on it, and then the others would form up on it. And Nancy, those circular points, when I was in the Strategic Air Command, it was called the orbit point, and you flew 4-minute legs with a 4-minute turn, holding that position till everybody was pulled in. And it was the navigator's job was to get everybody into position.
Yeah.
In my situation, we had to get everybody into position, and the lead navigator would coordinate with the B-52 or the B-47, and then we would rendezvous with them for refueling. But this airplane here, it's a beauty.
Yeah. Too bad it's not in a museum somewhere. The other thing that Harry described so aptly in the book, Nancy and I talked about the other day, was the use of flares, different colored flares by different squadrons and different groups to help them identify each other, right? So it just is almost hard to imagine. And I suppose if we went back and looked at the right episodes of Masters of the Air, there's some portrayal of that. but how dangerous it was. Scores and scores of planes went down during this process over the years because of the lack of visibility and the bad weather. So, okay, so that's just our first part. I threw a couple slides in here. I don't like to assume that everybody knows everything there is to know about B-17s. Those of you that have been with us for the past 8 months or so, this is pretty elemental stuff. But, and I got a little better shot here, 10 men in this plane, 5 of them are right up front, pilot and co-pilot in this area up here with the windows. And I'll get you a nice picture of the navigator and bombardier here up front. They're down lower and right in front of the plane, right? The radio operator back here, the top turret gunner, who's also the flight engineer. So you got 5 of the 10 men, right up front in the front third of the plane, which was the most dangerous part of the plane. All of it was dangerous, but the most dangerous because eventually the Germans realized if you attacked from the front, as our good friend Colin Heaton has taught me now for months, that was the best place to attack. It was the weakest point to attack, especially early in the war. And if you took out any of these 3 or 4 men in the front, you were taking out sort of the command of the plane, right?
Glenn, if
Yes,
I may interrupt, Mike
Yeah.
just me. Mike is on. He's muted. He can't talk.
Okay.
So if Sean, if you could unmute Mike Faley, please.
Got it. There you go, Mike.
Mike, thank you for coming on. I know you're not feeling well. We'll catch up with Mike here.
Okay.
As soon as we can hear you, Mike, please let yourself be known. So, front of the nose of the plane, and you'll see in another shot here in a second just how crowded this was. In fact, here's the next shot. Rebecca, remind me, this was a painting that you know something about?
Yes, this was painted by Gil Cohen, who's done a lot of war paintings, and it is of the Regensburg raid. And this is my father in the forefront, and the navigator. We're actually my children are very excited about this painting because my dad was in fact left-handed. So this is my dad, and then it's Jim Douglas, the bombardier, in the background.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, most really intelligent people are left-handed. So I can see that in Harry. I think it's a great portrayal, a great painting. What's really neat about this, and this is where we're going to get into for a little bit next, are the tools. Look at the desk that he's got there. And you can see a stopwatch. You can see that he's recording on his log. Is this the E6B down here, Bob? In this,
No.
Is that the E6B calculator? Yeah. Okay. You can see, the tools of the trade, which were not, this is not GPS.
The E6B is against the frame there, right on the left-hand side.
Here.
No, move over to the left. There, that's it.
Okay. Well, we're gonna ask Bob to lead us through a quick discussion of the tools. These are some of the same tools that Bob used. Actually, first, we're just going to touch on navigation school. I'm sorry, I got that a little confused. They trained lots of navigators during the war at many different bases. Just happened to be one of the bases, Hondo Army Air Base, Army Airfield in Hondo, Texas, that I found online. Just a shot of navigators being trained in some sort of facility, maybe on board a plane. Again, you can see the tools they're using right there. This is, to make it the pronunciation right, is it Mather Field, Rebecca?
Mather.
Mather Field in California, outside of Sacramento. This was one of the earlier, in the earlier part of the war, navigators trained here, and this is where Harry was trained. Navigator training was, as I've read it, anywhere between a 16 and a 20-week course. So these were men that were brought in, no background, no special knowledge of training. Many of them have been trying to become pilots. Had Harry tried to become a pilot first? Is that right, Rebecca?
Yeah, that's correct. In fact, I looked this up today. He said that he had 12 hours of flight training as a pilot before he washed out. And he noted that the name of the officer that washed him out, his name was actually Maytag, as in which he thought was pretty funny because of Maytag washers, but he was actually kind of grateful. He thought that he really would not have been able to be a pilot. He said he probably saved my life as well as a crew somewhere.
So I was looking at some statistics just before the program. 191,000 odd air cadets were awarded wings in 1942 to 45, right? 132,000, in addition to that 191,000, did not make it through pilot training. So, the washout rate was incredibly high. Now, this is all pilots, not just heavy bomber pilots. These would have included, the fighter pilots and so forth, right? The numbers are staggering, just staggering. 50,000 navigators were trained. I could not get a good number on how many bombardiers were trained. Everything I said, just tens of thousands and tens of thousands. My guess is maybe more bombardiers than navigators. So you can imagine these guys going through 16, 20 weeks of school, and I think they had to have a certain number of hours in the air as well. I think it was 104 hours in the air on practical navigation problems. So Bob, I ask you as a navigator who's someone that really knows this, is that a lot of training for someone who goes from zero to, hey, jump on this plane and fly across the Atlantic Ocean?
It's bare minimum, and as some of those guys are lucky to make it across.
Yeah.
And some did not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some did not. Yeah. Yeah. So, but the context I would say is that the logistics of creating an Air Force, an Army Air Force in this case, from almost scratch in 1939 and 1940 to what it became with 2.5 million men in 1944 and 45, and training these tens of thousands of pilots, bombardiers, navigators. It's just an amazing feat in and of itself to be able to do that. But they had to sacrifice here and there some skill, some experience. You just couldn't make these men, you couldn't give them 500 hours of flying time before you sent them out. You gave them enough that hopefully they could make it.
On the job training.
OTJ. Did Mike Faley, are you able to speak up, Mike?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there you are.
There we go.
Thank you for joining us, Mike. I know you're not feeling 100%.
Well, you got some great people. You got some great people on here and a great subject.
Thank you. Thank you. So next we're going to jump in. This was the navigator patch I found online. I thought kind of interesting with Donald Duck. Love to know more of the background of that, is who designed that and why.
Disney.
Well, I kind of guessed Walt might be behind that, huh? So I flashed this picture up again because I'm going to ask Bob now to explain some of the tools of the trade.
Well, there wasn't much there inside. As you have in the picture there, that's the E6B computer, which is nothing more than a circular slide rule. And I'm sure that the people on the call here tonight, Ben and Brad, you probably can tell me more about that than I know. But it'll work out. You're using your ground speed and how far you have to go. It'll give you timing. You can make altitude adjustments. That's one side of it, and then on the other side, you could figure out where the wind was coming from. You use it all the time. You use it for flight planning, and you use it continuously through the flight.
Harry, I'm going to quote Harry on page 60 of the book I have of his book. Let me get to it here. Sorry here. He's talking about the training under Ev Blakely and how many times they trained to form up and so forth. And there's a line here at the end of one of the paragraphs. I could not make a multiplication error or mistake or misread my E6B. You know, it sounds like it was his extension of his left arm.
Absolutely. You used it all the time. It sat there and it was in your hand more than it was on the desk.
Did you still use this in the 60s?
Oh yeah, people still use it today.
That's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. Okay. Plotters. What do you do with a plotter?
Well, I never used one like that.
This one does look ancient.
This is a plotter.
I guess you put this on
your you measure distances with it, distances on a map.
Yeah. Same sort of thought here.
A divider, yeah. Okay, you could call it a divider, yeah.
Now this is one that I found fascinating because when you look at it, to me it looks like a carburetor out of a 1958 Buick. But
that's a drift meter. That's like a periscope that looks down at the ground, and it tells you using that you can determine the ground speed that you're making over the ground, and you can tell which way the airplane is drifting, to the left or to the right, of course. That one is very crude. They had to put a pencil down on a piece of paper and then draw lines, and then you had to line up the lines with a grid. The later drift meters were a lot better. You could just line up the grid, time the you pick a point on the ground. When it hit the top of the reticle, it would drive down, and then you time it, and that would be converted into a ground speed. Frankly, if the navigator could see the ground, that was one of his most valuable assets.
So in reading the literature, and as you explain things to me, Bob, there's celestial navigation. Obviously, if you can see the sky and see the stars or the sun, it gives you clues as to which way you're going and plotting your course. If you can see the ground, it's terrestrial navigation, right? So what happens when you're flying through the clouds and you can't see either?
You keep pressing along. You're dead reckon ahead. One of the things that you have to recognize that when you're flying in formation, or if you're flying a combat mission, celestial is worthless. That is not used. In order to use celestial, that airplane has to be level flight for at least 4 minutes or 5 minutes in order to get a decent reading. Combat flying, no. And Harry mentions it in the book.
Yeah. And define dead reckoning for our audience.
Well, dead reckoning is just like you're going down the road. You're going 60 miles an hour down a straight road. Well, in 1 hour, you're going to travel 60 miles. That's dead reckoning.
So if you're flying and you can see the ground, it's just as, you can do dead reckoning as you recognize points on the ground.
No. That's map reading.
It's map reading. Okay.
The dead reckoning is if you say, here I am now, I'm pointed in this direction, in that given amount of time, that's where I think I'm going to be.
So if there's no wind, you go 30 miles and that's where you're going to be. If there's wind, that's why you have to have the drift meter to figure out how far the wind is pushing you off of that course.
The only reason the navigator's in the airplane is because of the wind.
Really? And Harry talks a lot about the wind in the book, and we're going to get into some examples. Okay, so what I'd like to do, and we're right on time here, except let's see here. So I'm expecting another Luckadoo at this point. Not yet. Is talk about the growth of Harry as a navigator. And there's about 6 or 7 points in his book that I think are incredibly important. The first, as so well shown in the Masters of the Air series is Harry flying with initially the Brady crew on the North Atlantic route to get from the United States to England. And these were the various routes that were taken. Nancy and Rebecca, I think you told me the route that Harry took with Brady's crew was this middle one here through Iceland or through Greenland to Iceland to Prestwick. Is that
correct?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, to us today, as we hop on a plane and fly to England without even thinking about it, it's nothing. But back in 1942 and 43, this was an incredibly dangerous route because of the wind, because of the conditions, because they could lose sight of the ocean, lose sight of the sky, and have to more or less guess as to where they were going, right? So the interesting thing is for Harry, as he navigates across, and we know that it's a kind of a longer story, but he navigates across, and you can see he would have come into Prestwick, but he misses England, which is kind of humorous and kind of humorously depicted in Masters of the Air. And he actually doesn't know he's missed England until he sees flak over France and turns back. So, Bob or anybody, Mike, how could that be? Is that because of the cloud conditions? Is that because, Harry's a newly minted navigator? His skills were minimal at that time, no experience.
Remember, it's your first time going over. You've never flown this route before. You've flown over land most of your time while you're training to be a navigator. So you have a lot of different points on the ground that people used. You're going over water.
What he also says in the book is that he was not adequately trained, and that he was a real smart guy.
Yes.
And he taught himself after that to be a better navigator.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of the story we're going to tell here. But I just want to use this as the starting point in the development of Harry Crosby as a navigator, because the first day on the job was not the best. No fault of his own. He's a 20, what was he then, Rebecca, 24-year-old?
Yeah, I think he was 24. He was in graduate school when Pearl Harbor happened. So, I think he was 24.
Which made him one of the older guys. But
yeah, he was one of the older guys.
But it's not like he went to college for navigation.
No.
So he starts out, and of course he's I'm sure embarrassed that he missed England and had to turn around once he sees France come on. Okay. So I'm going to jump a little bit here. Next picture is going to be your father, Jim, but I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. Okay. Actually, no. So initially, this is Ev Blakely, Jim's father. The only allowed handsome guys in the Hunters Bond group. That was a requisite. You could see that very easily. Initially, Harry is not with Ev Blakely's crew, but eventually he does join Ev Blakely's crew. And the first time he's on Ev Blakely's crew, Jim, is this mission to Trondheim, where he's a temporary, he's a fill-in navigator that day, right? So maybe
For
Mike,
Bubbles.
Yeah, for Bubbles. So maybe Mike, again, it's very well depicted in the Masters of the Air program. But Mike, if you feel well enough, what happens on this mission, and how does this impact Harry's ability to navigate?
Well, you got a few things again over water all the way in, and he's getting better at this point as a navigator versus the first time going over. It depicts it inside Masters of the Air, but he'd never led up to that point. He's always been the guy that's followed the leader, follow the rest of the group. Now he has to be at front and center and get the whole group, not just his plane, all the way to the target and to bomb that target and then come back again and hit England across the thing. So his navigational skills, yeah, does he get a little lucky? Yeah, it looks like he's doing a little dead reckoning to a degree because he doesn't have ground to figure out. He's over water, but he hits it. And he hits it on the mark. And coming home, same thing of trying to get the one crew back to England and them slowing down, which was unheard of. You don't slow down for a straggler. Your meat on the table. You put the whole group at risk. But they did that and got that crew home, and doing that. But Harry got the credit for getting them there, also getting this guy back to England, and then getting them back to Thorpe Abbotts.
Yeah.
Quite an accomplishment for him. That's a feather in his cap.
Yes. And this
probably is one of the most, is the one thing that really gave him the confidence to go forward as a navigator and loaded it up for being group navigator, which comes not too far after, a few months after this point, back in November.
Well, this is, though, the mission that he impresses Ev Blakely and higher ups, and he is assigned to Ev Blakely's plane at this point and becomes squadron navigator and therefore the lead navigator for the squadron.
Yep.
Right.
Can I tell a story?
Of course.
Okay, so Everett's first navigator was Bubbles Payne.
Right.
And Crosby's book gives kind of two reasons why he was knocked off the plane. One is he had a girlfriend in Norwich.
Yeah.
And he seldom dated back in the United States. So he was smitten by this girl. He missed the truck back to the base. And because he missed the truck, Harry Crosby got the job because he was an excellent navigator. So the story that's told in the TV series was also in the book, was that he was sick. And he came back and he was so sick he couldn't be a navigator on the flight. Yeah. So anyway, there's two different stories about why Bubbles didn't make it. Bubbles was my dad's best man. And my mom said that he was a classy Kentuckian. She loved him.
Probably sipped a couple bourbons, I would imagine.
Yes. Oh, that's the other story that Ralph Larson told me. That I said, how did he get that name Bubbles? And I said, I always thought it was because he's always smiling, an effervescent guy in every photograph he's in. And Ralph said, no, it's because he drank too much.
So here, this is a major step in Harry's career. Proves himself on this Trondheim mission, as Mike said. But also, the key is after this, he's flying with Ev Blakely. And what I'd like to do now is play Lucky's next clip, because he talks a lot about your father, Jim, and Harry.
Hold on one second, everybody. Getting that up.
Was doing in conjunction with his pilot, Crosby developed a very, very close relationship with his pilots, particularly Blakely. He was on Blakely's crew, and of course they were designated as a lead crew of the 418th Squadron. I did not fly in that squadron, but I flew with that squadron as a co-pilot first with the 351st, eventually as a command pilot in the 351st, and ultimately with the 350th. So my association with Crosby was primarily on the ground before we ever got in the air. But I had a great deal of respect for him because he picked up the slack. The former lead navigator that he replaced had fouled up and caused Crosby to be put in his place. And that really turned out to be a very fortunate thing, because I doubt that there was any navigator in the entire 8th Air Force that was as conscientious about what his responsibilities were as Harry Crosby. And ironically, the fact that he got airsick on every flight was ludicrous, because that didn't happen to very many people, but it certainly happened to him. But he refused to let that impair his ability to perform. And the reason that
Okay, we're going to stop there, continue another minute or so with Harry. Rebecca, you and I were talking yesterday about Harry's work ethic and where it came from. And you were explaining to me, his parents and so forth. Is this where you wanted to maybe read a little something from Harry's experiences?
Sure. Well, a couple of things. One is I looking at some letters that he wrote around the time that he was promoted to the group navigator. This was written after the Bremen mission, late October of '43. He said, I feel a little sorry for Joe Payne. He tried hard, but I always felt he was so busy that he missed opportunity to get a lot done in the job, and I don't know how he's going to take it. He goes on to say that Major Kidd was in favor of the promotion and Colonel Harding had okayed him. And he said, I still feel a little guilty, for I don't know what will become of Joe, but I am confident I can do a better job. And it seems like maybe I will be a major someday. And it is accurately portrayed in Masters that he really lacked the confidence of being a highly quality navigator initially. That was accurate. But I think if you try to look at sort of his background, he was a very serious worker. His father was as he wrote it, this is a quote from him. His father was not totally admirable, but he was never in want during the Depression. He had a really serious work ethic, and that he passed on to my father. Even though his own dad was a drinker, he was a womanizer, gambler. He tells a story that my father worked at Sears and Roebuck the year before he was going to college at the University of Iowa. And so he worked at Sears and Roebuck, and he had saved $72 to take to college. And his father borrowed it and said, hey, look, I'll take the $72. I'm playing poker tonight, and I'll make some more money for you, and then you'll be able to buy a car. So his father took the $72 and, needless to say, lost it all. So my dad had $12.60, he said, to take to his freshman year in college. But what was most interesting was what he said after that. He said, it didn't leave me, I had no hard feelings about my father. He taught me I could do anything. And I think that's part of what enabled him to succeed as a navigator. He understood, he knew in the beginning that he was in over his head. He felt terrible about getting lost on the way to England. That story is absolutely true. And he knew he got to put his head down and practice. And he talks about practice over and over again. I think, Glenn, you were going to comment on that.
Well, and this is where in his book there's some really interesting passages about his relationship with Ev Blakely. Slowly, I became a navigator. I don't know when I finally began to like Ev Blakely, but I do know that I admired him and respected him almost immediately. I gave him a lot of credit for my later success as a navigator. Ev was a good pilot for a navigator. And then I won't go on beyond that. But obviously, Jim, your father played a huge role in Harry's development.
What do I owe you?
Well, if you invite me down for the next Steeler Cowboys game, that'll be good enough.
Sure, I got a big TV.
Oh, I was thinking
There's
of
going to be a lot of
Put it
seats
on
in
the
that
schedule.
stadium.
I was thinking of box like at the 50-yard line, Jim, but that's okay. I'll take what I can get. So further the development of Harry. Last month we talked about the mission to Bremen, so I don't want to go into that again. This is a photo, or I'm sorry, a painting, which I think Jim shared with me, if I remember right. And this is the famous October 8th mission, where they're shot up bad. They go out of formation. They have to plot a different course back by themselves to England. Harry does it. Ev and Jack Kidd, who was the command pilot on that mission, demonstrated such incredible superior skills in bringing them back. This is the wreckage, shot of Harry at the wreckage. I just want to mention that as another step in his development. Okay. Now, Colin, don't get too excited. I'll put your hero up on the screen. But before we get to talking about Curtis LeMay, I'd like to play that next clip, Sean, if you would.
Sure. 1 sec. Before we do that, Brad had asked a question in the chat. Were lead navigators, quote unquote, checked or backed up by other navigators in the formation to ensure they were on course and also to become the lead if there was a casualty?
Great question. Mike, you want to take a shot at that?
You usually had two PFFs in the groups early. One was lead PFF. The second one would have carried the command pilot for the mission for that group, and there would have been the lead navigator in that plane. So your backup is really that backup PFF.
PFF being what?
Radar equipped.
Yeah, that's a little bit later, in later 43 and 44, right? And when Harry becomes group navigator, he addresses exactly that question, which we'll want to get into in about another 5 minutes.
I mean, each plane had its own navigator in there. Bombardiers were traded out for Toggeliers probably in around March of 44.
Yeah,
is where it started.
Yeah.
So, is there always additional navigators there? Yeah, you have to have backups.
So
the airplane was always where the lead navigator said it was. There was no one telling him or questioning him. The lead crew who led the mission, if there was anything that the whole integrity would fall apart if it were run any other way.
And in fact,
that lead pilot was the ultimate decision maker, and the crew coordination between the pilot and the navigator. That was essentially the essence of success.
And in fact, we're going to get into that with Lucky here in this next clip or two. Okay, go ahead, Sean.
And the reason that I think that he excelled in fulfilling his responsibilities so acutely, as the docuseries Masters of the Air did a good job of portraying, was that he worked so closely and practiced endlessly with his pilot in order to know that each of them were on the same page and fully understood and appreciated what each was supposed to do.
Right.
Unfortunately, lead pilots and lead crews in the 8th Air Force were seldom in a position to really perform more than perfunctorily, for the simple reason that the command pilot who replaced the co-pilot, and as you know, the co-pilot was then delegated to go back and fly the tail gun position.
Your favorite spot.
Formation
which was
officer.
my unfavorite spot, and one which I thought was absolutely ludicrous and unnecessary, and yet they continue to do that. But the lead navigator had to become acutely aware that the turns that he would order the pilot to make in order to make the rendezvous or to make the checkpoints on time was a matter of skill, tremendous skill and courage. But they had to work together as hand in glove. Yeah. And he and Blakely did that. But when a command pilot entered the picture, such as Colonel LeMay did, or his group commander, Chick Harding, the command pilot often was not as conscious and aware of what he was doing and how he was doing it, and the domino effect that that had through the entire formation. And oftentimes, these very high-ranking generals would get in the right seat as command pilot on a given mission, and they'd goof up royally.
Well, if I could,
it's amazing that we ever hit a target.
So let me add a little something there because it's a little unfair. The short clips, I talked to Harry in that recording for darn near an hour, but I can't play it all. And later on, he goes on to say, look, these weren't all command pilots that did that. Certainly Jack Kidd, who was a command pilot many times for the 100th, was not that way. General LeMay, certainly not. What he was complaining about were those generals who went up once every 3 or 4 months and didn't have the experience. Bob, you had a thought on that, given your experience.
I'm a firm believer that generals, their feet should stay on the ground. I think I'm looking at my picture here. I see Ben there, and I think he can attest that you have a crew that's trained hard, or work so well together, and then all of a sudden, some Yahoo gets into the airplane and says, "I'm the boss," and the results are not good. And in my 5,000 hours of flying time, I had one guy behind the line, a pilot, and who was like that. And I had to take a crash axe out and say, "You are going to turn the airplane," because we were on a collision course. Now those guys, they, as you said before, they're dangerous. They kill people. They should stay on the ground.
And why were they flying those missions?
Ego.
Nope. Who's that asking? Mike?
I am.
I'm sorry. Is that Mike asking?
Yep.
Yeah. So, Mike, your comments on Harry's comments? I'm sorry.
It's not a comment on that. It's a comment on why they flew the missions.
Yeah. Why were they flying the missions in your?
Because if you were going to stay in the Air Force, you had to have combat experience. I don't care what your rank was.
Yeah.
If you wanted to excel, if you wanted to advance in war and after the war, and everybody was looking at that, you had to have combat experience. And guess what? You wanted that Silver Star. And that Silver Star usually came by leading a very, very tough mission.
Yeah.
And those awards counted as you went up the ladder.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is what brought into the 8th Air Force a round of pilots from the States in April, May of 44 that took over command positions of groups and squadrons. And that cost lives. And they came over specifically because if they did not get that combat experience, they were not going forward after the war.
Yeah.
You're right, Mike.
You're 100% right from everything I've read and heard before. So it is 8 o'clock straight up. The next part is furthers this point about command pilots, and I bring in Curtis LeMay. But before we do that, Sean, would you like to do the quick station break, please?
Sure thing. Go real quick with this so we can get right back to our program. We're just going to thank our sponsors here, Tobacco-Free Adagio Health. They've been with us for quite some time. They were with us at the Rivers Casino this past week. They are dedicated to preventing and reducing tobacco use, educating people about tobacco hazards, and advocating for healthier places to live, work, and play. Check them out at tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. We have UPMC for Life. They will help you make sense of Medicare, get the answers and information you need, such as how to choose the Medicare Advantage plan that's right for you. UPMC Life for Life has plans designed for veterans by veterans that can save you money and get you more benefits. You can view all of their plan options by going to upmchealthplan.com/Medicare. Check out our new magazine. This should be in your mailbox, and if it's not, it's just because we don't have your address. This is a free quarterly magazine that we send out to everybody we know. But please send us your address. We'd be happy to get you a copy in the mail or send you multiple copies if you'd like to hand them out within your community. I will also put a link to our survey in the chat by the end of the program. Please take it. It's about 2 to 3 minutes long. Real quick, just lets us know how you liked or didn't like the program. And we watch these very closely so that we can keep bringing you good quality programs week in and week out. We have a in-person breakfast coming up at University of Pittsburgh, Greensburg. So not here in Oakland and downtown Pittsburgh. This one's in Greensburg. That's coming up this Saturday, November 9th. Next Monday, Veterans Day. You all know that. Veterans Day on Monday. Join us that evening, 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. for open conversation. We have guests lined up and topics to talk about. So please join us to have an open chat. And then we'll be back next Thursday, November 14th here for Glenn's program about the Ghost Army of World War II. So that's what we have coming up with VBC.
Just a little aside here to what I just talked about, the command pilots. Bubbles Payne was killed because of putting in a commander of the 100th Bomb Group by the name of Colonel Kelly in charge. He went on his mission and went over the target twice. Same altitude, same course, and he got that crew killed.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's where Bubbles Payne died versus at Munster.
Yeah. And Mike, you'll appreciate this next segment that we're going to go into with Lucky and the further development of Harry, because it addresses exactly what you're talking about. Did I mess up somewhere there? Is that on the screen? I think I did mess up here.
No, I brought up the video. Everybody should be able to see it.
Okay, no, not quite ready for the video yet.
Oh, not quite ready for the. Okay, that was my problem, Glenn. My apologies. I thought we were moving on to that. I stopped my share. You can go ahead.
Okay, 30 seconds here. We'll see. How do I do this now?
Lots of great stuff in the chat here tonight. Everyone, keep it coming.
And yeah, after this next segment, we will address questions. Okay. There we go.
That's October. There we are.
This is the man. Colin, you remember this fella?
Yeah, his wife Helen was a great hostess.
I love this.
You're absolutely correct.
Love this picture when I found it. Those are the words that popped into my head. Imposing. He's an innovator, no BS kind of guy, an exceptional leader. Right. And in chapter 5 of Harry's book, it's called The Curtis LeMay Meeting. And that's what I want to go into next. And that's what I discussed with Harry. Right.
With Lucky. You mean Lucky, right?
I'm saying with
Not
Lucky.
Harry.
Please excuse me. Yeah.
If you were talking to my dad, let me know about it. I've been gone a few years.
Well, my next show is on the Ghost Army, Rebecca.
Yeah, there you go.
And I just love this. I found a quote from LeMay. The best way to lead a mission was to stand between the pilot and co-pilot. You got a good view there, had no immediate manual tasks, nothing to do in the aircraft you were flying in, nothing to do except control the entire formation. And that's him congratulating a crew here at some point during the war, right? So as you queue up this next video for us, Sean, let me explain. So this is a continuation of the discussion about command pilots. And in chapter 5 of Harry's book, and go ahead, Sean, when you're ready. It's about a meeting that Harry attends as a very junior guy in that meeting. It's mostly with group commanders, squadron commanders, and above. And LeMay runs the meeting. And he walks in and basically says, look, I'm the only guy in this room that's been the pilot, the co-pilot, the navigator, the bombardier, and every other position in the plane. I know everything about this, right? And I know we're not hitting the targets. And I think I know why we're not hitting the targets. So I explained this to Lucky, and he had read that chapter. Now here's Lucky's remarks about that point. And I think it's rather point degrees. And therefore,
25.
Pardon?
As much as 25 degrees.
25 degrees. Okay. So what's the point that he's making there, Lucky?
Well, the point is that many people don't appreciate and recognize the fact that on the bomb run, the bombardier is literally flying the airplane through the bomb site, and the interconnection between the autopilot and the bomb site. And he's cranking in all of these corrections and input for the bomb site to determine the precise point at which the bomb should be released. However, in the heat of battle, quite frequently, the command pilot would become jittery or would be concerned and grab the controls and disengage the autopilot and fly the airplane manually. And this would throw all of the bomb site calculations off. And that was because the majority of command pilots, unfortunately, didn't really understand fully the impact and the effect of the rest of the formation when they made abrupt changes in direction, altitude, or control. And when you make even the slightest half a degree or full degree turn in the lead ship, that telegraphs through the rest of the formation. It's like cracking a whip. And those on the outside, of course, have to fly extremely fast, and those on the inside of the turn have to slow up to almost stalling out. And most command pilots didn't appreciate that. They weren't conscious of it, or they weren't aware of it, or at any rate, they didn't observe it. And as a consequence, formations would become scattered, or missions would be fouled simply because of the poor actions on the part of the command pilot.
Yeah. And that's what LeMay was getting at in that meeting. Do you think it had any impact? Did it change any afterwards? Harry doesn't go follow that. He doesn't say whether it had an impact on the command pilots or not.
Well, when LeMay was leading, he was acutely aware of what he did and how much it affected the rest of the formation. And he was very careful, and he was also acutely aware of the how both the navigator and the bombardier should perform. And I'll never forget that when we were having a debriefing of one of the missions, and I don't really recall which one it was, but LeMay called the lead bombardier up before the entire assembly. He was a major and a wing bombardier, and they had missed the target. And so he said, "Major, what happened?" And he said, "Well, I'm sorry, sir, but my bomb shackles froze up, and I couldn't release on time." And he said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Major, you're a liar.
Wow.
You missed the target by 9 miles, and you were short. If the bomb shackles had frozen up, you'd been overshooting
Yeah.
and be long. Sit down, Lieutenant."
He had a way of getting people's attention.
He busted him 2 grades in front of your eyes,
Wow.
simply because he said, "Well, you should have practiced and made sure that those bomb shackles were operating. You knew you were going to lead the mission and how important it was that they operate properly, and it was your responsibility."
Let me come back to another question, if I could, and then a follow. So that's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I just love that that last part from Lucky. And I would guess for those of you like Colin, and I guess Mike, you met Curtis LeMay as well.
I never met Curtis LeMay,
No,
but I did meet his daughter.
okay.
And the comment about his wife, Helen, being a great hostess, she was amazing. That was how he got his information about what would happen. She would run the party, she'd have the food, and LeMay walked around and listened. And he found out everything he needed to find out behind the scenes at those parties. It was great.
Colin,
But she told
that remark there at the end by Lucky about LeMay, does that play true to your knowledge of Curtis LeMay?
it was no nonsense.
That was actually a very sterile version of the one I heard from LeMay himself. I'm talking, it was less colorful coming from Lucky, but LeMay was very good because LeMay would have parties and he would have Helen. He told me that, and Helen told me this, and he would have parties just for the wives, and she would invite the wives to come in and just sit around and talk. And what LeMay was finding out was how much his officers were telling his wives that was classified information.
Yeah.
If you want to get a good book on LeMay, read the Kozik book.
Yeah.
I've got it. Yeah.
That's a great book.
So the discussion here I had that goes on and on with Lucky that I can't play at all was as a result of that meeting or meetings like that and that time frame and the problems that they were having with finding the target accurately, repeatedly, sometimes because of the commander, the flight commander, sometimes because of or the command pilot, I should say, or sometimes because of the weather or whatever, finally results in, as I read the history, the creation of what was called the Pathfinder groups, right, in the fall of 1943, and maybe started training a little bit earlier, and they actually come into play in
August 43, first mission, end of September 43.
And Mike, explain, in a minute or two, what the Pathfinder group was.
It was a radar-equipped bomb group, the only bomb group put together in England from crews from all the different bomb groups. A message was sent out to all the bomb groups to send us crews. What they forgot to say was what it was for because it was top secret. So if you're a group commander, a squadron commander, you got rid of what you thought was the worst crews you had. And these crews ended up getting sent to Alconbury to be trained. Now, the first 12 crews came from the 92nd Bomb Group. And those are the ones you're going to see used at the end of September, early October, and into November,
right,
as they're training the other crews. So
they
didn't have enough to give to each bomb group.
Yeah.
So they split them up between divisions and wings.
And this was the pilot, Big Frank Valish, that eventually is sent by the 100th to become trained, and him and his crew are trained, and they were the bad news bearers of the 100th, and that's why they were sent. But as Harry relates,
guy lost 7 planes.
Yeah,
they call him an ace,
a reverse ace.
But the thing was, He's a hell of a pilot.
Well,
He completed his tour missions.
yeah. And Harry says he becomes, and his crew becomes one of the best crews available, and was happy to fly with them in 44 once he came into play. I want to go just a little quicker.
His crew ended up going from Alconbury to Snetherton Heath. The 96 was given all the PFF planes for the 3rd Air Division in April of 44. The combat wings did not get PFF planes until June 44. So as the 100th went in there, all the 100th lead crews were shipped to Horham on detached service to be trained there and to fly from there.
And this is a shot of one of the early Pathfinder planes with this sort of big device hung underneath it that the guys called the Mickey, or a Mickey, and technically was called H2X, which was a very primitive sort of ground radar developed by the British, I believe.
Yes.
And these begin to fly, as Mike said, in a bit in September, October of 43. This I thought was a great image. Bob, you commented on this. Is this as sharp an image as you had, Bob, back in the 60s?
Frankly, I question that image. The early radars they were really primitive. You would get um, bright spots on the ground if there was enough there to have reflective energy. And if you use it to keep away from other airplanes in the formation, it doesn't work if the airplanes are, if you're flying on the wing and it's going back and forth. So I don't know where that picture came from, but um, I I wonder about it.
But what it gave them was the ability to bomb through the clouds.
Right.
As in another part that you won't hear from my Lucky interview, Lucky talks about they had a primary target. If that was covered up with clouds, you went to the secondary target. If that was covered up, you went home and dropped the bombs in the channel. Wasted day.
Yeah.
Or a target of opportunity.
Or
Yeah.
now
Not very accurate.
they began to bomb blind, right? And it had to make a difference in terms of navigation as well, I would guess, right? So I want to stop here because I haven't done a very good job tonight of taking questions from the audience. And then I want to allow just the last 5 or so minutes to further explain sort of the last few steps in Harry's development as a group navigator, as potentially the navigator of the whole 8th Air Force at the end of the war. But Sean, are there questions we should take?
I don't see questions particularly in the chat, but please, everyone, just wave your hand. I can unmute you, or any of our guests. Feel free to chime in with thoughts.
Harry Crosby was an inspiration with his book. Now, you take a look at his navigational side of things, but his book is one of the very first that people really delved into. It told the story, a story any person could read, understand, and feel like they were in a plane, like they were there with him, whether it was with the puke bag or he was in flak or they were trying to get themselves home after Bremen. He put you in that plane. He put you in those circumstances. And from that point on, you saw a lot more books coming out, individual books on what was happening in the air war in the 8th Air Force. So for me, I looked at it when I got involved in the 8th Air Force and looking at stuff. It really was the 100th Bomb Group. It was Harry's book. It was Ian Hawkins' book, Munster the Way It Was. It was Kaplan's book, One Last Look. They told stories. And the stories just weren't about the B-17s, which is what brought most of us in this thing, or wanting to find out more. Just go one step further and find out about the man, the person behind the position, the guts it took at the age they were at to walk into a plane with a 1 in 3 chance of survival. And you had to do that 25 times, 30 or 35 times before you could come back.
And
Folks,
Mike,
that's something else.
I appreciate those comments, Mike. You've taken us right to where I'd like to go here to sort of finish this up. I love this picture of Harry. Rebecca, I imagine this has got to be a favorite of your father's. Facial expression, I don't know, who knows what he's looking at and studying. It just, I don't know, to me, reflects the man. Obviously, I didn't know him like you did. I only know him from his book, but it's a special picture.
That picture we can't see, Glenn, unless you were sharing.
Yeah.
Oh, no, geez, oh, peace.
Thank you.
How dumb. How dumb.
That's okay. Also, there was a question from
No.
Ann Taylor. How was the crew equipped in terms of weapons and escape and evasion kits, etc.?
And let me take a real quick shot at that one, and anybody, any of our guests can chime in because we've covered that in a lot of earlier programs. So, you know, the Flying Fortress was called the Flying Fortress because there were a dozen 50 caliber machine guns on it, right? That was the primary defensive weapon, right? 10 men, never had parachute training. They all had parachutes, which they didn't keep on them during the flight, but put them on when the plane started having problems. And the first time they jumped out of an air, when they jumped out of the airplane to save themselves, was the first time they'd ever jumped out of an airplane. Again, back to how fast they had to train these men. They did have survival kits. They had Mike or anybody, I guess they would have had a handgun with them. They would have had a map, those silken maps, you know, woven into their kit, but not much. They didn't have too much else. Some local currency, perhaps, that sort of thing. If you would send me your email, I will send you copies of the half a dozen programs we did with Marilyn Walton on the POW experience, which also covers, you know, the stories of how these men were shot down. I'd be happy to back.
She's really good and one of the experts on POWs.
Yeah, she was the historical consultant to Masters for POW.
Yes, she was.
Like Colin was the historical consultant to Masters for the Luftwaffe. So I want to try to finish this up in the time we have here, get done more or less on time. 3 missions that Harry goes on in late 43 and then 44, I think just very nicely highlight his development. The first mission, and these dates, please take them with a grain of salt because we're not 100% that they're correct. But in November of 43, he says, in the history of failed missions of the 8th Air Force, November 7th, 1943 will always remain one of the worst, a real botcheroo, as he calls it. And I'm sure there were some more colorful terms given to it at times, right? This was one of the early Pathfinder missions led by a Pathfinder crew. Harry goes along. Chick Harding, the group commander, is on the plane. Chick Harding's very sick at this point, probably shouldn't have been flying at all. They get into some very, very bad weather. They end up 25 miles off target in terms of forming. Formation. They go through the wind prop of another group. It almost takes them down. The wind, they didn't calculate the wind correctly. The wind was much more ferocious than it had ever been. They come out of a cloud formation and they fly through a group of B-24s, 21 other planes. Miraculously, there's no accidents. They don't hit each other. And at the end of the mission, and also in the middle of this, and because they're forming up over at this point the channel near East Anglia, and the Luftwaffe sees this, and they send fighters out and shoot down many planes. So that was the botcheroo that happened in November of 1943 with the Pathfinder led crew. So these were very difficult formations to put together, particularly in bad weather, particularly with the wind. In December of 1943, there's another Pathfinder mission. But this turns out much, much better. Again, not with Valish, but with another Pathfinder mission. And in this mission, what he says here, says, on the way in, that's the way into the target, everything went elaborately well. The problem was that just before we hit the IP, smoke, flak, and clouds drifted over the target, and the bombardier never did see what was supposed to be the point of maximum impact. Before Pathfinder, we would have brought the bombs home or landed with them. Now, with the help of Mickey operator, that being the H-2X, the bombardier dropped his bombs, aiming generally at the whole city. And the mission came back as a success. And then the final part I'm going to get into is just one quote out of a mission from June the 8th of 1944. So this is well into him having been group navigator. And it is with Valish as the Pathfinder crew at this point. And he talks about Valish and how he came to be such a great crew. And I won't go into the details, but there's again another wind problem. Harry is along as the command navigator, but he's letting the lead navigator in the Pathfinder crew find his way for the mission. And at one point, he senses that something is wrong. So he goes on the intercom. Command navigator to pilot, you better rack it around 90 degrees to port, meaning, I don't know what, Bob, make a big turn to port, right, to the right. Valish was not happy with my interference. Now, what's going on? GD if I know, but you better do what he says. He's been here more times than we have. The command pilot came on. Cross, you better be right. I didn't feel very sure. I began to sweat, says Cross. Well, it felt right, and I didn't have any better evidence than that. I came back on the phone. Now, 45 degrees to starboard, back on the original heading. 32 seconds later, the needle went around. We're right on track. Finally, someone comes on the intercom. The command pilot comes on the intercom. GD, Captain Crosby, how'd you do that? And here's the quote. Rebecca, I don't know. I'll read this unless you have it right in front of you.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
And this is the conclusion. How? Says Crosby to himself. I had no idea. Aerial navigation was no exact science, and I always felt I was less exact than anyone else. Skills, experience, luck, I had no idea. Was this the navigator who just a year ago missed England by 150 miles? So that's my point. In 1 year, this man goes from a rookie navigator who missed England by 150 miles to a man who had this incredible experience, skills, and I would argue, as I discussed this with Bob, who's a navigator, just this, I think he develops just this innate ability, this intuitive ability to know what he's doing up there in the air. And he becomes, in effect, the command navigator for the 8th Air Force. Comments, Mike or Bob or Rebecca?
But I beat those comments.
I just want to say that he did have this deep confidence that I think he gives his father a lot of credit for. His mother was a real Calvinist and a very serious and very stern, and he appreciated that. So it was that sort of deep confidence, but he also gave tremendous credit to the higher ups who had them practicing over and over and over and over again. In his book and his letters are full of stories about practice after practice after practice. If they weren't on a mission, they were up there practicing, and that was no small piece of his story. So, he was a smart guy, and he knew what he didn't know, and he knew what he needed to learn. But he also felt that he was, the folks around him and his pilots made a lot of difference.
Glenn, the deeper I got into the book, the more and more impressed I got with Harry Crosby. He had the ability to see small things and recognize that things were changing, and then he would do something about it. And then he worked very, very closely with the pilots, where almost their thoughts would be akin to one another. And that was the essence of it all. It was the crew coordination and his ability, his constant desire to excel. The man was a remarkable man.
This is a shot. We're not 100% sure, Nancy, unless you had a chance to identify it, but it portrays what I want to portray. There's Harry in the middle of a dozen other officers. I believe all navigators. I believe
They are.
later in the war. Mike, do you recognize this picture?
Yeah, it's navigators from the group.
Yeah, because in the book, it becomes clear that Harry becomes sort of the father navigator, if you will, of the group, and eventually other parts of the 8th Air Force. He promoted them, he taught them, he cared about them, and it's clear that later in life he becomes obviously a professor and a teacher, and it's clear to me at least, or I would surmise, that this is a gift that he had to teach. And he really wanted to teach these men the right way to navigate, so that if they were put in, in charge as lead navigator or whatever circumstances, they knew what to do and they could get home.
I saw a question in the chat that I can answer if someone asked about a piece at the end of Ed Caro, is it? Asked a question about the end of Masters of the Air where Crosby is angry and goes into the mess hall and smashes one guy it smashes his face into his breakfast because he was angry at him.
Yeah.
If you want to know they took a little bit of liberty there, but the situation was that individual, and I don't remember his name or his rank, but he had locked up the equipment room, and the folks, the guys that were going out couldn't get their parachutes to take with them on the mission. So if you remember in Masters, he goes up to the guy and says, "Have you ever been in an airplane without a parachute?" So he was furious that this guy had locked the building so they couldn't get their parachutes. I don't think he actually smashed the guy's face into this breakfast, but he did when he went into the mess hall. He did kick the door open with his foot, and he made the guy fix the broken door that my father had made as he was going into the mess hall. So that was what was going on there. Was this guy had locked the building before they could get their parachutes, and he was pretty furious.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah.
One last photo I want to show. Whoops, not that one. General Carl Toohey Spots, as they called, as was his nickname. At the end of the war, he's in Paris. He's the head of a very large headquarters. Both strategic groups, the 8th and the 15th, both tactical groups, the 9th and the 12th, report to him. It's what's called the United States Strategic and Tactical Air Forces. It's his huge headquarters in Paris with a lot of high-level men. And one of the 2 or 3 ending chapters of the book, I think, is just humorous, enchanting, fascinating. Harry's invited to go to Paris and to be interviewed by senior staff there to become the navigator, probably a colonel, maybe eventually a single-star general for this USS ATAF. And Rebecca, give me a real quick rendition of what happens there.
So he decides, he goes to Paris, he's wined and dined, he's, kind of blown away and impressed, but he decides not to take the position. And in looking over that, it makes sense. My father came from a very small town in North Dakota. He lived in Iowa before the war in small towns. These guys, Paris just wasn't his world, and it didn't really look appealing to him. And also, if I'm not mistaken, this was in the spring of 45.
45, yeah.
Yeah. And he had gone home in the fall, and my mother was pregnant with my oldest brother, who's mentioned actually at the very end of Masters of the Air. So my mother was quite pregnant at this time, and he would have wanted to any way he could to get back home. So it totally makes sense to me that he would turn this down. And I really think besides the pull of his family and beginning to start a family, I think he just wasn't comfortable around those folks. They weren't his people.
My sense is this was Harry. This was Harry's world.
Yeah.
With the guys teaching, training, leading these men, not being part of some,
echelon, high
echelon
up.
bureaucracy, high up kind of guys.
So he wanted to be able to be with them, but not. It wasn't what he wanted to be doing every day. He also really did want to be a teacher. He was a fabulous teacher.
Yeah. So I guess the concluding point of this is, again, it's fascinating to watch the development of this man from a rookie navigator with sort of minimum skills and watch his growth over the course of these, 3 years that he serves he's one of the two or three men in 100 that is there the entire time, except for 1 month break back home. And I agree with Mike and Bob and others, just what a fascinating man, and someone that should be an example to all of us in future generations. Any questions or comments?
It's interesting to note he went from second lieutenant to lieutenant colonel in less than a year.
Yeah. Yeah. And
that's amazing.
Yeah. Mike, thank you for being on tonight, even though you're not 100%.
One little thing that was brought up and I couldn't talk about.
Yeah.
Those formations were only used in the 1st and 2nd Air Division. Never made it to the 3rd.
Interesting. Yeah.
But they are colorful.
Were they called circus planes too? I think I've heard that term. Maybe every group had a different name for it.
They did.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody. Nancy, I'll start with you. Thank you, as always, for your support and knowledge on the 100th Bomb Group, and Harry. Bob, wealth of knowledge on navigation. We barely touched the surface of it, I know. But it was deeper than I ever went. So thank you for your contribution. Jim, you still there? Jim Blakely? Thank you for being on.
Thank you.
Your father played such an important role with Harry's life as a navigator. Rebecca, it's your dad. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm sure I missed somebody. Colin, thanks. I know we didn't get deep into Curtis LeMay, but thank you.
That's all right. Curtis speaks for himself.
Okay. He doesn't need a loudspeaker. I know that, right?
All I know about Curtis was when a scotch ran out, he gave me a 20 and said, "Here's the store. Go to it."
One last plug. This is available on Amazon. It's a great book.
Yes.
Collins, tell us about the LeMay and the 135 and the cigar.
Oh, yeah. The story about when he lit up a cigar next to it and somebody said, General, aren't you afraid that you might the plane might blow up? And LeMay says, it wouldn't dare.
We are going to come back to Harry Crosby and A Wing and a Prayer one more time in December. And that's going to be, the topic is going to be each of the 7 bomber group commanders of the 100th Bomb Group and the development of those. Mike, I haven't told you that's your show, Mike. I'm depending on you for that.
Uh-oh.
Okay.
How truthful do you want me to be?
You read Harry's book. He's got a lot of comments about those guys, and some of them are not, all that favorable. So
he sugarcoated it.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Okay.
I know so.
You know so. Yeah. Sean, thanks very much for helping out tonight, riding wing for me, and we're more or less done on time. So thank you to our audience. I'll see you next week.
Thank you, everyone. Again, in-person breakfast, Pittsburgh, Greensburg on Saturday. We'll be back Monday night, Veterans Day, for our open conversation. See you all then.